Okay, in this presentation we are going to look at complex numbers. Now, what I'm going to do here is just a slight variation on what I've done previously. That's all. So essentially it should be something very similar to one of my previous videos. So I have z here, which is I minus 4 divided by 2i minus 3. Now you might notice there that I've switched the order of the real part and the imaginary part, okay? So what we have there is a fraction, okay? So what we're asked to do here is compute the real part of z, or z, and the imaginary part of z, or z. Okay, so this is something very similar to what I've done before in my first video. Now, I'm just going to shake things up slightly. So what we have here is, what we're going to do here is look at the complex conjugate of the denominator. Okay, now I'm just going to slightly shake things up here. So the complex, this is the denominator, and if we stated in the conventional form, it would be minus 3 plus 2i. Okay, so we put the real part first, then the imaginary part. And what we would do here is, to get the complex conjugate of that, we would actually change the sign of the imaginary part. So plus 2i becomes minus 2i. Okay, now you can re-express this as minus 2i plus 3. Okay, so it's essentially changing the sign of the real part, essentially, which is constructively the negative of the complex conjugate of the denominator. Okay, so we could actually just sort of expressing that out a little more fully, minus 1 times 2i plus 3. Okay, so essentially I'm just messing around a little bit with the complex conjugate of the denominator. So this is how we would sort of tackle the problem. So we have our expression here, I minus 4 over 2i minus 3. And what I'm doing there is sort of leaving it in the form that as presented in the question up here. Now, this is the complex conjugate together. So I have it broken up into two parts. 2i plus 3 times minus 1 over 2i plus 3 times minus 1. Okay. Essentially what I'm doing is just actually separating out the minus 1s. The point of this really is actually, it just actually makes for a slightly cleaner expression. I'm just going to sort of omit one part there. Now, without any loss of generality. Okay. Now, the only thing actually that to watch out for is that when we evaluate these, it will actually end up that the numerator and the denominator will actually be the negatives of if you used this expression here. So just watch out for that. I'll come back to that shortly. Okay. So, but the reason I'm doing it this way in this particular video is just to show that you can actually keep it tidy, okay? So I'm going to sort of move that up there, and we'll look at both parts together. I'll just sort of hide the denominator part there very briefly. So what we have here is I minus 4 times 2i plus 3. 3 times I minus 4 gives us 3i minus 12. 2i times I minus 4 gives us 2i squared minus 8i. Nice, tidy, traceable format there. So 2i squared minus 8i plus 3i minus 12. So I squared is minus 1, so we have minus 2 there. 3i minus 8i, that gives us minus 5i, and minus 12 there. Okay, so minus 12 and 2 gives us minus 14 when we add them up together, minus 5i. Now, if we had used the other complex conjugate, or the proper complex conjugate, we would have ended up with something like 14 plus 5i there. Okay. The denominator is the same. Okay. 2i minus 3 times 2i plus 3. We work it out more or less the same way. And what we end up with is minus 13. Okay. And again, just to be clear, if we actually used the complex conjugate, we probably ended up with plus 13 there. Okay, so just actually that sort of throws you a little bit. You should actually end up with a negative number here if you change the sign. Okay, so let's just sort of tidy that all up now. Let's just sort of move that into our final answer there. We get minus 14 minus 5i all over minus 13. That's the numerator, that's the denominator, which is the numerator is coming from there, the denominator is coming from there. So we end up with the same answers. Essentially, this is the minuses signs cancel out. Okay, so what we end up with is 14 over 13 plus I times 5 over 13. Now remember, what we were asked actually for is the real part and the imaginary part. Okay, let's just move up there. That and that. Okay, so just don't forget to spell that out. Real is 14 over 13. Imaginary is 5 over 13. That's always important in the question, to actually state your answer properly. Okay, we'll leave it there.